this section 3.3.2 basically considers talks about the possible loopholes that we have in the Harrod model. So as I just said that the Harrod model basically gives you an equation, a relationship between the growth rate of income or income per capita and the important parameters, which are the savings rate, capital output ratio. So the four important parameters that we have identified in the Harrod equations are the savings rate, capital output ratios, population growth rates, and depreciation rates. And from these equations, if we want to consider a particular growth rate of total income or total income per capita for a particular economy, then we can make if and then statements, which means that we can say that if savings rate is equal to so and so percentage points and capital output ratio is equal to so and so value, population growth rate is equal to so and so, and that depreciation rate is equal to a particular value, then we can say that the growth rate will be equal to a particular value. Plugging in the values of these different parameters, we can calculate the growth rate of income or income per capita. So we can make these if and then statements from the Harrod model, but what we miss out is the reverse effect of this if and then statement, which is that we are saying that if savings rate is equal to 10%, then growth rate is equal to say 2%. But we are actually missing out on the point, which is the reverse linkage between the growth rate of income and savings rate, which is that suppose savings rate, an increase in the savings rate by 10% induces an increase in the growth rate by 2%, then it's possible that this increase in the growth rate by 2% further affects the savings rate. So we will look at how growth rate or how different levels of income changes the level of savings rate. We will talk about it, but definitely we can believe that if people are poor, if people do not have enough income to maintain their subsistence consumption, then we can expect their savings rate to be lesser as compared to people who have higher income, who are able to cover their subsistence consumption, and then they are left with some amount which they can possibly save. So if we look at income levels, then we can say that this savings rate, remember we are not talking about total savings. Total savings is represented by capital S in our model, where we say that total savings is equal to savings rate into total income. This total savings definitely will get affected with the changes in income, because you have income here in the equation. But what we are saying here is that in fact this small savings rate, which is small s, will also get affected with the different levels of income. So if income is low and if income is high, then this small s will also differ. You might have a smaller s in this case and you might have a higher s in this case. So Solow model doesn't really consider this reverse linkage of the growth rate with the savings rate. In a way, what we are saying is that this parameter of savings rate is an endogenous parameter. It is not an exogenous variable in the model, it is an endogenous variable. Why is it an endogenous variable? Because the two variables, which is the income rate, growth of rate of income and savings rate, they are determined within the model, is what we are trying to say. An exogenous variable is something whose value is not determined in the model itself, whose value is determined outside the model. But in this scenario, we are saying that the value of the savings rate is actually determined within the model, and that is the reason why we are calling this parameter of savings rate as an endogenous variable. So there is no exogeneity of this parameter in the model, and we will discuss about this exogeneity, this endogeneity in detail in a while. But it is important to understand this that these parameters are not exogenous in the model. Similarly, if you talk about the population growth rate, again, population growth rate will depend on what is the level of income in an economy. So if you remember, in the first unit we had talked about a demographic cycle, which we called as demographic transition, and we talked about how population will change with the changes in income. So we talked about how at low levels of income there was high death rate, high birth rate, and that led to low level of population. Then there will be an increase in the population growth rate, and then it will eventually no, it didn't fall. It was, yeah. So then it will eventually start falling, right? It even went negative for economies which had enormously large levels of income. So we know that even the population growth rate changes with the changes in the level of income. So again, we are missing out on the point that as change in population growth rate induces a certain change in the income growth rate, this change in income growth rate will again further induce a change in the population growth rate. And that link is being missed out in this model. So this will change G, specifically G star, and then this will further change the population growth rate, and this link is being missed out in this model. We say that these parameters which are responsible for bringing out a change in the level of income or income per capita are exogenous, but that's actually not true. We see that these are endogenous in the model. And how exactly are they endogenous in the model is something that we'll now move on to. So first is the two important parameters are basically savings rate and the population growth rate that we are going to discuss about. But we are also talking about the endogeneity of capital output ratio as well. Although we won't be discussing a detailed explanation of how that is endogenous, but we definitely consider the variable of capital output ratio as an endogenous variable in the model. So the first is endogeneity of savings. So as I just said that savings may itself be influenced by the overall level of per capita income in the society, and it might also depend on the distribution of income amongst the population of a particular economy. So savings is dependent on level of income and the distribution of income. Now suppose we talk about a household whose income level is so low that they are not able to cover their basic consumption needs. Obviously, in such scenarios, it's possible that the savings rate will be lesser, and at times it is also. I mean, it's we're not saying that people would not save at all. There might be some savings, but it would be a very small value. So in this scenario, if a government tries to boost or raise the savings rate, it is unlikely that there would be any kind of effect that you would see in the economy, because you are in an economy where people do not have enough income to even cover their basic consumption needs. So it is unlikely that we will rely as an economy, we won't be able to rely on this parameter to boost the economy, because uh, if the economy doesn't have enough income to meet their basic levels of consumption, it is unlikely that we can boost the level of savings by any chance. So we might have to rely on other sources of growth such as capital accumulation or external credit or aid. Now, as economy moves from a lower level of income to a higher level of income, so say you were at this point of income and then you progress to greater levels of income. So maybe you reach a point where you can be called as a middle income economy, and you're not no more in the trap of a low income economy where your income is not sufficient to cover the basic consumption needs. So say you have reached a point where you are able to cover the basic subsistence consumption, and definitely then you will be left with some part of your income that could go into savings. So middle income zone is the zone where you can expect the savings rate to rise. So from what you were saving at this point, now the savings rate will increase. Remember, we are not talking about absolute savings. We are not talking about capital S. We are talking about small s, which is the percentage of the income that goes into savings. So say if this is 0.2, it means that we are talking about, we are saying that out of the total income, 20% of that income goes into savings. So we are saying that this proportion, this ratio will increase when you move from a low income level to a medium income level. Now, again, as you move from low income, as you move from medium income to a higher income category, you will expect definitely the savings to grow, because you have reached a point where people are not just meeting their subsistence level of consumption, but they are able to live a luxurious life, because we are at this point where income is much greater than what you would need to meet your basic needs, and even you are able to live a luxurious life, and even after spending on your luxurious life, you're left with some income that could be saved for in the future. So as you grow, as you go from medium income to higher level of income, definitely the total savings are going to increase, the absolute amount of savings are going to increase, but it is possible that this savings rate might actually fall. If you compare the middle income uh, to high income level, then this small s might actually fall. And the reason being that when you reach a point where you have a very high level of income, then a lot of your income goes into social consumption. Now, this consumption is not really needed for your subsistence, but this is a consumption that you might want to make to maintain your standard of living. So it's possible that your ratio of income that goes into savings might actually decrease. We are not saying that the absolute savings will decrease. Absolute savings will definitely increase, because richer countries have higher levels of income, and even if they are saving say 10% of their income, then the absolute amount will be way greater than what a middle income country will be able to save with say a 20% savings rate. So what we are saying here is that it's possible that the savings rate might fall for poorer income, for richer income countries. Whereas for middle income countries, they know that their future might be uncertain, and they might want to save for the uncertainties that might rise in the future. So for middle income nations, it's certainly true that they will be saving a much higher percentage of their income as compared to countries which are either poorer or better off or richer than the countries in the middle. So at the two extremes, it's likely that the savings rate would be lesser as compared to the point in the middle. And this trend is actually true for countries, as in this trend is true across countries, meaning that if you compare a low income country to a rich income country, this trend will take place, this trend will hold true. But if you also compare people within countries, so if you talk about a specific country and you talk about low income households, compare them to middle income households, and compare them to rich income households, you might find a similar looking trend where the poor income households, low income households, and the high income categories might save a less percentage of their total income as compared to the ones in the middle zone. So we see that with the changes in income, there is a change in the savings rate. So when we talk about the effect of small s on capital G, we are not really taking into account the entire effect of small s on capital G in the Harrod model, because we ignore the fact that this increase in the value of G, which has come because of an increase in the value of S, will further lead to some changes in S. Now, it's possible that with the increase in S, the income growth rate increases, and it increases such that you reach a point which makes your country a rich income category country. Now, if your country becomes a rich income category country, then it's possible that further with this increase in G, your savings rate might fall, because we just said that as we move to a rich income category, it's possible that the savings rate might decline, because people will tend to save more as they know that they do not have to really worry about income in the future or uncertainties in the future, and they might want to show off and get into social consumption, and they might spend a lot and save a lesser percentage of their income. So it's possible that then this might lead to a small reduction in the savings rate, and then this will further have some effect on growth rate. So when we talk about the Harrod model, we only talk about this chain and we ignore the rest of the effects. And that sort of creates an error when we make any kind of conclusions from the Harrod model, because we ignore on the endogeneity of the savings rate. So this creates a tendency over time for the growth rate of a country to alter in a way that mirrors the movement of the savings rate with income. So it's possible that the growth rate of a country might get altered, and this trajectory will sort of be aligned with the trajectory of the changes in the savings rate, which we see here in this cycle as well. Prediction basically from this discussion is that both low income and high income countries will have lower growth rates as compared to middle income countries, and the reason being that the low income countries and the high income countries will tend to have a lesser savings rate as compared to the middle income countries. And if we believe that savings rate and growth rate of income per capita are positively related, then we can say that we can predict from this discussion that both low income and high income countries will have lesser growth rates as compared to middle income countries. Please note that we are talking about the rate of change of income and not the absolute level of income, because rich income countries will definitely have a higher absolute level of income as compared to middle income countries, but they might have a lesser growth rate as compared to middle income countries, is what we are trying to say from our discussion in this section, as a prediction or as a conclusion from this discussion. And we will validate if this prediction holds true or not later on in this chapter, but right now we're just setting this prediction based on our discussion so far. So in a sense, we are saying that a simple Harrod-Domar model is a neutral theory of economic growth. It provides no reason why growth rates systematically differ at different levels of income, and there is no feedback from the level of per capita income to the many parameters affecting the growth process. So it is more like a neutral theory where it doesn't really care about the further effects of the changes in the absolute level of income on the parameters that are actually at the first place affecting this change in the per capita income. So it is a neutral theory of economic growth, and we can call it like that because it ignores on these aspects. The next part, which is the endogeneity of population growth. Now the next important parameter that explains the changes in the growth rates of income in the Harris model is the population growth rate, which we had denoted by small n. Now again we are saying that this population growth rate will actually be different for different levels of income. And if you remember, we talked about the relationship between population growth and level of income earlier as well through this concept of demographic transition, which basically says that as countries grow from poorer income nations to richer income nations, the population growth rate initially increases and then it starts to fall. And the reason being that when you are in a low income zone, then you expect the death rates to be very high. So in poorer countries, death rates, especially among children, are very high, and we've already discussed that how I think we discussed this point in Deaton's chapter, where we said that how death rates uh, one symbol of being in a poor nation is that the death rates are high among the children, among the youth, because children are in a specific age category where they are the least uh, I mean, this category is the category which is least likely to die if the health conditions are secure in a nation. But if in a particular nation death rates in children are higher, then that indicates a poorer infrastructural, a poorer health infrastructure scenario in a particular country. Whereas in a richer income nation, you will find some death rates, but death rates will occur mostly in the old age category, which is a category which has a higher likelihood to die because they have spent a specific age, a specific lifespan of the lifetime, and hence they are more likely to die. So another important identification of a rich and a poor nation is to identify the category of death rates. So where is it that the most where is it that the death rates are driven from? Which category is driving the death rates in an economy? Again, signifies the health, the economic health of any nation. So we know that in poorer countries, death rates are higher, and they are higher especially because of the higher death rates in the category of children, in the young age category, because of problems such as undernutrition, high incidence of diseases, difficult conditions of sanitation and hygiene, and so on and so forth. This leads to a very high death rate, a high mortality rate in the children. Now, because there is high death rate in children, people will have more. There will be a higher birth rate in the economy as well, because people will plan their family based on how many people will actually survive. Now, especially this factor is very important in poorer countries, because poorer countries tend to believe, poorer households tend to believe children as their assets, children as monetary assets, because a lot of times these children are pushed into earning for the family once they cross a specific age of their life. They are not really I mean, poorer households who cannot afford to send their children to study at a school, what they usually do is that they ask their children to work for the family and earn for the family, and then they become a monetary support for the family. So they might want to plan their children based on how many children will survive. So if they know that the death rate is higher among children, meaning that it's less likely that the number of children who are taking birth in a family will actually survive, so they will tend to have a higher number of births as in comparison to the number of children that they would actually want in their family, because they know that the chances of the children surviving is lesser. So the birth rates will also be higher in poorer income nations, and the death rates will also be higher. This will lead to the combination of a higher death rate and a higher birth rate will actually keep the net population growth rate uh, at a low level. So in a poorer income nation, the population growth rate will be lesser, because Number of people taking birth is higher, but at the same time number of people dying is also higher. Now with changes in income level, as you move from a low income level to a slightly better level of income, you will notice increases in living standards. People will have better sanitation and hygiene. People will be more nourished because now they can afford to have good food. They can feed their children well. Maybe with the improvements in the income level for a nation, health infrastructure will also rise. Maybe people have affordable, um, they can afford health, and they might have accessible health institutions around themselves. So all of these things will change with changes in the level of income, and that will induce a fall in the death rate. Now, with the fall in death rate, birth rates will also start falling, because now people expect that the number of children who are taking birth in a household will actually survive. So they will then plan accordingly, and the birth rates will also start falling. But this linkage between fall in death rate and fall in birth rate will take some time. So although it's possible that the death rates will start falling quite immediately as the level of income increases, or as the standard of living increases, but it's possible that it might take some time for people to realize that the death rates are falling, and then the fall in the birth rate might actually come with a lag, because people will take some time to adjust to the changes in the death rates, and hence the birth rates will fall after a certain point of time. So for a specific time period, the relationship between birth rate and death rate will be that the death rates will start falling, but the birth rates are still at the same, are sort of changing with a slow pace. So the birth rates are still rising, the birth rates are higher, they will start falling, but they'll take some time to adjust to the changes in death rate. So for that short period of time, you will have a high population growth rate, because now the birth rate is high, but the death rate is falling. So number of people taking birth is still increasing, but number of people dying are now falling. So you will have a larger amount of population who is able to survive, and hence as you move from a low income level to a higher income, or to a medium income level, you will find that the population growth will start increasing. Now, as income again progresses, people will start believing that yes, the death rate is actually falling, and hence the birth rates will also start following the trend, and the birth rates will also start falling. So, in the third category, you say that the death rates are falling as well as the birth rates are falling. Now, with the fall in the death rate and the fall in the birth rate, again the population growth rate will tend to fall. So, you basically have this inverse U-shaped relationship between population growth rate and income levels. And from this hypothesis, from this inverse U-shaped behavior, we can say that the population growth rate is definitely affected by the level of income in a nation. So again, the endogeneity of this parameter becomes clearer, that as the changes in level of income occur, there will also be a change in the population growth rate, or small n, which is again not accounted for in the Harrod model. So now if you look at this figure, you notice that this is the kind of trend that we can expect population growth rate to follow vis-a-vis per capita income. So on the x-axis we have the absolute level of per capita income, and on the y-axis we have different growth rates. The first growth rate is the population growth rate, which will initially be lesser because of high death rates and high birth rates. Then it will start to increase because of high birth rates and low death rates, and then it will eventually start falling because of low birth rates and low death rates. This horizontal line here represents the growth rate of total income, which is actually G in the Harrod model. This is represented by this line, and it is constant for different levels of income. We are assuming that it will be constant for different levels of income. I hope you are clear with the idea that this and this are two different things. We are talking about level of income here, absolute level of income. These are the level values of income, whereas these are the growth values of income. And there is no relationship such as that you can't really say that if the level of income is lesser, then the growth rates will also be lesser. Growth rates indicate the change in the level of income, whereas the level of income is the absolute level of income. So say an economy having say $1,000 as the absolute level of income, this will be called as the absolute level of income. And if I say that this economy is growing at 2%, then that means that we are talking about the growth rate. So when we say that a savings rate will increase the growth rate, we mean that this will increase. We are not really talking about the absolute level of income in that case. We say that the growth rate will increase, meaning that if an economy is growing at 2%, then the economy might grow at 3% or 4%. So I hope these two ideas are clear. This is the growth rate of total income and this is the absolute level of total income. Right. Now this is horizontal because we are believing that any other effect is constant except the population growth rate. Now if this is the growth rate of total income and this is the population growth rate, then the growth rate of per capita income, which is what? Per capita income is total income divided by population, and we are saying that growth rate of total income is G and growth rate of total population is N. So growth rate of this variable, which is per capita income, will be what? G minus N, right? So we can basically say that the difference between this line and the difference and between this line is nothing but the growth rate of per capita income. So this difference is nothing but the growth rate of per capita income. Now if I look at three zones here, if I divide this entire diagram into three zones, I can identify this for this is the first part where the growth rate of per capita income is positive because G is greater than N in this area below this level of income, which is written as trap here. So this level of income is called as trap, and we'll understand why this is called as trap. So this is the first zone where the per capita income is positive. In the second zone, the population growth rate is greater than the total income growth rate, and hence in this zone the growth rate of per capita income will be negative because N is greater than G. In the third zone, again G is greater than N and hence the growth rate of per capita income will be positive. So we have three zones here. First is the zone where output level per capita income is less than the trap level, where per capita income is positive. Growth rate of per capita income, sorry, not per capita income is positive for all levels. Growth rate of per capita income is positive. In this zone, we are seeing that the growth rate of per capita income is negative, and in this zone, we are saying that the growth rate of per capita income is positive. We call this Y as threshold and we call this Y as trap. We'll just understand in a while why do we call this as trap and this as threshold, and we'll understand what's actually happening in this graph. You notice that at this level of income, the growth rate of per capita income is positive, meaning that with each passing year, with each passing time period, your per capita income should increase. So if initially you begin from this point, now since the growth rate of per capita income is positive, in the next time period it will increase. Say it increases to this point. Then again you notice that the growth rate of per capita income is positive, so again it will increase and it will keep on increasing till you move to this point of trap. Now why is this point called as trap? Because if your economy lands up in this point, at this point, which is a point greater than the previous income level, but now it is more than the level of this income, which is called as trap. Why is this called as trap? Because if you are in this area, if you are in this zone of level of income, you will face a negative income growth rate. So basically what will happen, suppose you are at any point in this region, which is region 2. So if say you are at this point, you will face a negative per capita income growth rate, primarily because all your income, all the growth rate of total income is getting absorbed by the population growth rate. Your population is growing at such a high level that it surpasses any growth that's happening in total income. So your per capita income growth rate is negative, and even if you are at any point, you will always face a negative per capita income growth rate. And that's the reason why this is called as a trap, because if you cross this trap, you will land up in this zone, which is a zone of negative per capita income growth rate. And there is no possible way for your economy to move beyond this point. You will notice the arrows here, the arrows are moving in this direction because you are at any level of income in this zone. Suppose you are at this level of income, the only trajectory you will notice is in this direction, because you are facing a negative per capita income growth rate. Your population is so high that it sort of absorbs, it drinks up all the growth rate that is happening in the total income. So there is no case that you can move ahead. Your level of income, per capita level of income, will not grow in the positive direction, it will only grow in the negative direction, and that's the reason why this is called as a trap point. It would be better for economies to stay in this zone, but again, that's not natural. Why is it not natural? Because in this zone the per capita income growth rate is positive. So even if you are at a low level of income, eventually you will reach this point of trap, and once you have reached this point of trap, there is no way you can cross this point of threshold. If you leave your economy as it is, definitely you can move beyond this point of threshold by making some policy changes, which we'll see in a while. But if you leave your economy as it is, then there is no possible way in which, if you are at this level of income in this region 2, there is no possible way that you can move in this direction, that can lead you in this direction. But suppose, hypothetically, believe that there is a possible way which can induce your economy, which can lead your level of income to this point in this direction, then this is called as a threshold point. Why? Because beyond this point, if your economy has crossed this point of threshold, then beyond this point you will only and only face income growth rate in this direction, which is positive income growth rate. So your income will keep on increasing without any pushes, without anything happening in the economy, if you have crossed this level of income. And that's why this is called as the threshold level of income. Because if your economy, suppose your economy started at this point, suppose your initial level of per capita income for your economy was at this point, then you would never, this economy will never face these two zones, because this is the threshold level of income and it is already above the threshold level of income. So from here, it will only and only move in the positive direction, that the per capita income growth rate will be positive. But suppose your economy starts up in region 1 or region 2, then it is possible that if it starts in region 1, it will possibly cross the point of trap and come in region 2, and then once it lands up in region 2, it will only move in the negative direction, which is that the income will keep on decreasing. And that's primarily because of the high population growth rate in this part, in the second part. And this is actually this nature of the movement of per capita income and the growth rate of per capita income is actually witnessed in a lot of countries. When we were discussing the previous chapters in unit 1, we looked at some examples where we saw that there are certain economies which haven't grown since centuries. There are certain examples, so possibly these economies are trapped in this region and they are not able to cross this level of threshold, because of which they have never, they have never been able to witness a positive income growth rate. So it is possible that the population growth rate here sucks up all kinds of growth, all kinds of growth that's happening in the total income, and because of which people or economies are not able to move beyond this point. So how can you actually, because imagine you are not doing anything to your economy, or maybe your economy is not responsive to any kind of policy changes that the government is doing, and then if you are in either region 1 or region 2, then there is no way that you can cross this level. It is only possible to move in this direction. You will only toggle between region 1 and region 2, because if you are in region 2, eventually you will land up in region 1 because you are facing a negative income growth. If you are in region 1, then you will eventually land up in region 2, and you will only toggle between these two regions. So and they are definitely the problematic areas. It's important for your economy to move and cross this point, and because once you cross this point, you will only and only face a positive income growth rate, per capita income growth rate. And how can you do that is another concern, and we'll see how can you possibly push your economy beyond the threshold point. Okay, now how can you actually push your economy beyond the threshold point? So you can definitely make some temporary adjustments to your economy that will have long lasting effects in your economy. So the first possible case could be that you push a increase in the savings rate. So suppose economy induces a change in the savings rate. Actually, the diagram is drawn here. If it's clear to you, I'll just demonstrate the effects in this diagram. So this small figure that you see here, remember this is just a replication of the figure that we just saw. This curve represents the population growth rate, and this is the initial level of total income growth rate. Now, if you push and increase the savings rate, if the government introduces a policy that pushes the savings rate, then you will see that this horizontal line will get shifted upwards. Say it gets shifted upwards to this line. Because if the savings rate is increasing, then by the Harrod model we know that the small g will also increase. Now when small g is increasing, then this horizontal line will shift upwards, which is what's happening here. And you notice that now the level of threshold has actually decreased. The point which we were calling as threshold in the initial diagram has reduced, has decreased, and because of which it's possible that the economy might cross the threshold point. I'll just demonstrate in this diagram also if it's not very clear there. So suppose this is the population growth rate, this is the growth rate of total income, and we called this level of income as the threshold level of income. Now if an economy pushes the savings rate in the economy, then the small g will also increase by the implications of the Harrod model, which will lead to a shift in the horizontal line. This shift will occur because of an increase in savings rate, and this will actually lead to a new threshold level, which is this point, which is less than the previous threshold point. So if an economy is able to reach this point, then you will be in a positive per capita income growth rate. You will be in the third region. So by reducing the target of threshold for an economy, you can take economies from this region to the third region. And now some economies are successful in doing so, some economies are not successful in doing so, because as I said that just by merely increasing the savings rate, you can't guarantee that the small g will increase. Because the savings, the mechanism that Harrod model relies on is that these savings will actually get translated into investments. If suppose your savings rate has been increased in the economy, first is that it is difficult to induce a behavioral change in the community just by introducing some kind of policy. But suppose you are able to do that. Suppose the government has introduced some kind of incentives for people to save, and people are now saving more. But just by merely saving, there's no guarantee that that will get translated into higher income growth rate, because it's possible that the savings might not get translated into good investments because of, say, weak financial institutions, not underdeveloped financial markets, and so on and so forth. So this shift will only occur if savings are actually creating some growth results in the economy. But believing that that has happened, we can see that the threshold level of income has now fallen. And with this fall in the threshold level of income, we can expect some economies to cross this point because now the target has reduced. Similarly, another alternative could be to introduce some kind of family planning policies. What this will result into is that it will lead to, now we are not hampering with the growth rate of total income, we are hampering with the population growth rate. So if the government introduces some kind of population drives or family planning drives, then the curved line will shift downwards, right? So now instead of shifting the growth rate of total income upwards, I am shifting the population growth rate downwards by introducing some policies. Again, this will lead to a lower target. New threshold will be at this point, and economies which have reached this level of income might be able to cross some temporary changes. And once the economy has, say, once you have reached, I mean, once you have lowered your population growth rate to this point, and say your economy has crossed this point and actually moved beyond this point, because you know that once you cross this point, suppose you land up at this level of income, you know that eventually your income levels will keep on increasing. So you will increase, your income level will keep on increasing, and you will definitely reach a point beyond this original threshold level of income as well. And once you reach beyond this original threshold level of income, you can actually relax your policy changes that you had introduced for economy to push beyond the threshold level. So you can go back to your original population growth rate after your economy has crossed this original threshold point. So it's not necessary that these policy changes have to be permanent changes. They can be temporary changes, and so that the economy can move beyond the original threshold, and then you can relax this policy. You can let people choose their family by themselves and not impose any kind of restrictions on them, and let them follow their original population growth chart. And then you are safe because you have already crossed this threshold point. Your economy has already crossed this threshold point, and you need not worry about getting back to the previous two regions, region 1 or region 2. So these temporary changes that you have introduced, either by increasing the savings rate or by decreasing the population growth rate, have actually created permanent changes in the economy. They can be used. The temporary changes in policy can actually have long run effects in the economy, and this point is important. This idea is important, that to create a permanent effect in an economy, we may not always need permanent policy solutions. It's possible that temporary policy solutions can also lead to permanent. All right, so this has to be clear, this diagram has to be clear. And as we saw that in the population growth rate is in a way dependent on the level of income or the growth rate of income. So it's important to incorporate these effects back into the model to be able to have a clearer view of the impacts on the growth rate of an economy. And having said that, we are not saying that there is no causal relationship between savings and growth rate. We are not doubting on the causality of the relationship between savings and growth rates. We know that savings will cause a change in growth rates. But if the feedback from the growth to savings is also significant, then we need to incorporate this in our theory. Similarly, the same thing occurs for population. We are not saying that there is no causal relationship between population growth rate and income. There is. But if the linkage, if the feedback from the income growth rate to population growth rate is important, then we need to incorporate that in our theory, which is missing in the Harrod model. But these things were looked upon, these things were identified later on, and Solo model was introduced, which had looked at, which had identified the endogeneity of these parameters and have sort of tried to cover these drawbacks by introducing new assumptions, which we'll see in a while. We'll look at the solo model in a while. In a while, but the idea is to sort of build upon the drawbacks that were identified in the Harrod model. Having said that, by no way this discussion sort of intends to say that Harrod model is less significant or Harrod model is less important. It is equally important, and it actually depends on which model actually holds true for which economy. For any kind of theoretical model in economics, the validity of these models always come from empirical results. So whether the Harrod model results have been witnessed in the economy is important to identify the importance of Harrod model, and it has actually validated. I mean, a lot of economies were based on Harrod model. Even the Indian economy, the first 5-year plans were based on the Harrod model, were based on the assumptions made in the Harrod model, were based on the calculations made in the Harrod model. So by no means we are saying that Harrod model is less significant or less important. We are just trying to expose the different possibilities, expose the different drawbacks or loopholes that Harrod model hasn't covered. And it's I mean, it's obviously true that in the current scenario Harrod model may not make complete sense, but it was important in some time in the economic history, and it had made important contributions to the planning process for a lot of economies.